Welcome to the For Love and Money podcast, the show where business and social purpose meet to inspire a movement for positive change. Here's your host, Carolyn Butler-Madden.
Today's guest heads up a business that I'm in love with, as anyone who knows me knows very well, Patagonia. Dane O'Shanassy is Country Director of Patagonia, Australia and New Zealand, an organisation that has been driven energetically by its purpose for many years and who many people describe as the poster child for purpose. Dane, thank you so much for agreeing to come on the show. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Look, I'm going to kick off with a question I'm asking of all of our guests, and that is, what's your perspective on the role of love in business?
Well, when you said this to me to have a think about it ahead of time, I admit I had to get my head around, what you were asking, because I don't really use the word love all that often in business, or I use it fairly liberally, but whether it's used intentfully or not. So I had a bit of a think about it, and I guess for me it boiled down to, ultimately being about people, and the connection that we have with each other. And that love, I think, describes this, reason that we connect because we want to, not because we have to, and what, so what drives that kind of interaction. I think, business is ultimately a tool for people and communities, to create shared value together, to exchange value. But I also think, as a relatively young person in the context of history, business and corporations have really, I guess, created a place where love and ethics and kind of interpersonal morals can be pushed to one side in the pursuit of profit. So I think when I was coming back to this word love and how does it work in this context, whether you use the word love, purpose, sustainability, circularity, all of these things I think are words that we're trying to kind of like bring into the kind of this very dry and clinical kind of business language that we have as a way to kind of like reconnect us with the sort of social contract we have with each other and that well-being that we require as a community and as individuals to live a happy, and fulfilling life.
I think that's a great way to describe it. And it's so interesting, isn't it? I think all of us in business are so subconsciously shaped by what we've experienced over the last few years, that anything that's personal or reeks of love or empathy or humanity in business feels a bit jarring, I guess, because it is siloed. It's kind of like, no, business is this professional.
In fact, it's probably been seen as a sign of weakness for many years.
Yeah.
And really, like, putting people first is one of the most, important things we can do as, business leaders, serving our colleagues to help create success individually and collectively.
100%. So look, for anyone, I guess everyone I know knows about Patagonia. Everyone seems to know what Patagonia stands for. But what I've learnt is people go, yeah, we know. But what I've learnt is not everyone knows the depth of of who Patagonia is. And I talk a lot in my book For Love and Money about identity, purpose being identity. It's about who you are, what you stand for, and what you care about enough to show up for day after day. So can you share, for those listeners who might not understand Patagonia's role, who you are, what your purpose is, and what inspires you guys?
Well, Patagonia is relatively new in the market in Australia. I think it's been here for about 10 years, so it's not an uncommon question. I used to get for a long time, where do you work? I say Patagonia, and they say, what's that? So it's a story I've had to retell a lot. And it's a complex company, as you're alluding to. It's not just a company that has a myopic pursuit of making money, and that's the end of it. So often I kind of think about, well, who's asking the question? So I feel like in this context, it's probably just important to say, hey, primarily our business is that we make outdoor clothing. We make gear that you need to enjoy nature, and I think it's through that kind of pursuit in nature that over a long period of time we've come to understand our impact on nature, but also its value to us as humans. We've also expanded our business into, making food as sustainably with as little impact as we can. We've got, other business ventures and impact investment funds. But I loved an esteemed colleague of mine, Rick Ridgway, once described, the answer to that question as we're in the business of making stuff people need to live, clothes and food. And I thought that was just a really neat way of sort of like packaging it up. So it's not so much like what do we do in business, but like, how do we do our business that probably people get most interested in. And, it's probably the best, I think, way to kind of bring people up to, how I feel about the company is just to kind of talk a little bit about its history. So it's been around for around about 50 years. The roots are in the mountains. Our founder, Yvonne Chenard, was a mountaineer, a very sort of, pioneering mountaineer, climbing, many places for the first time in the late 50s and 60s, and was a real kind of, I guess, not an outcast of society, but certainly someone who found his, love of that pursuit and nature as, all encompassing, and really, over time, wanted to figure out how he could just, spend as much of his time climbing and as little of his time working. So that led to him, he was a blacksmith by trade, and he started to make his own climbing gear. That was how the whole company started, making pitons for climbing mountains. And it's an interesting story too, because one of the, I guess, the first foundational things about, Patagonia's view on businesses have an impact on the planet. And when we know we've got an impact, we, I guess, have a responsibility to minimize it and think about how we can be restorative in our interaction with each other and the planet. Was a climbing experience. And back in those days, when people climbed mountains, they'd climb mountains with these iron kind of spikes that they'd hammer into the rocks. And, you'd hook your rope up and you climb to the next one, off you kind of go. But you would leave them there, and the next person who climbed that route would, be seeing, the remnants of someone who'd come before them. So their experience of nature was already kind of, impacted by, someone who had come prior. They would be damaging the rocks, essentially with each thing getting nailed in, the crevices would become wider and different for the next. So, upon realizing that, it was an early kind of indication that, we have an impact. And, he wrote a famous essay about, that was called Clean Climbing. It was in the very first Patagonia catalogue that talked about, how we could do things with a lighter footprint. Yvonne, after that, innovated a brand new climbing piton, essentially, that was made out of aluminium, that was reusable, that could be inserted into the rock, could be used and taken back out without damaging the rock, as a way of like responding to that observation. But it was also a pretty big and bold business decision. Back in those days, you could make an iron piton for about a penny, and he started making these aluminium chocks, and they were about $1.10 or $1.20 each back in the 50s. So it was a really big shift in how people experienced that sport. They also decided that year they were going to stop making iron pitons completely and move everything to this new aluminium chock, which really was going to either be the making or the breaking of his business. But it was a commitment that they made, and I guess maybe a first lesson in taking a bold move that they felt was not just better for the experience and the pursuit of what you're doing, but also reducing our impact, and it having a somewhat successful business outcome. That year, the climbing scene nearly changed overnight, and everyone started moving on to these new kind of climbing, pitons and chocks made out of aluminium.
Fantastic.
So another really, another foundational story that I think really describes, the company's learnings and experiences, along the way, that's helped, ground us to where we are today, is our journey to using organic cotton. So back in the 80s, we opened a new store in, New York, around the New York area. Maybe our employees in that store started to get sick. And what we found, upon closing the store and trying to find out what was going on, but was the chemical fumes coming off the cotton clothing that in a poorly ventilated space that were making our employees unwell. And that really led to this kind of, evaluation of, cotton as a material that we were using in our supply chain and making our products. Something that was a natural fiber that we all felt was at the time, a great alternative to synthetics and other things, for certain purposes. But what we found upon that research was that, cotton is a highly chemical intensive, growing process when grown under traditional, conventional agriculture methods. So Yvonne, this is, some years on from, these other learnings, over the years, kind of made a big decision that, within 1 year, the company was going to move away from conventional cotton wholeheartedly and move to 100% organic cotton, or we were going to get out of the business of, making, cotton clothing. And that was a really big and bold kind of, call to make. We had a big business at the time, using cotton as a material. We found certainly that, the staff weren't really happy about it. Not only do they have to do their day jobs and, design the range and, develop, the products and the materials, but they also had to kind of go and find and create a new supply chain for organic cotton, which in the 90s certainly wasn't necessarily a readily available material. So with that kind of like, somewhat staff revolt on their hands, it's a great kind of example of, how to bring people along with you is how they responded to that issue, which was taking our employees out on tours of farms, and they take out busloads at a time and they go and visit a conventional cotton farm. They drive out to these farms. They could really smell the pesticides that were really being in use. There was a lack of, biodiversity, bird life, and other kind of creatures that would, you would normally expect to see around a farm, because everything was really just kind of, plonked in a bit of dirt, sprayed with water and chemicals so it would grow, and then harvested and repeated. So that process of growing was very much an industrial one. After visiting those farms, they would take the employees out to an organic cotton farm. And, my colleagues described that experience, who are still with the company today, as just transformational. To pull up at a farm after being at an industrial kind of, agricultural place, and to hear birds chirping and to see bugs on the ground and to sort of see the difference in the soil and where these plants were growing, really kind of was just a night and day experience. And I think whilst everyone knew this process of shifting to organic cotton was going to be a huge pain in the backside, they all knew it was a worthwhile and the right thing to do. So that, I think, through that experience and really helping employees understand why that was important, we were able to kind of, really bring others along and make that transition. And we've been using 100% organic cotton, since 1996. And when that company made the decision to make the change.
That's a fantastic story, and I hadn't heard that one. And yeah, I love that. It shows how, you can take a negative, you can take it the way they initially responded, and then you invest in educating them, bringing them along the way, and yeah, you turn it around. The other thing, when you shared the story about how Patagonia started with the climbing pitons, for me, it shows that Yvonne started the company. It was a purpose-led company from the word dot. He created them because he wanted, he wanted to create a change in the world, right? But it comes down to.
I would actually say that we use that language today, but I think back in those days, it was just there was an idea, I guess, of people having consideration for more than just their own personal gain. And I think in Yvonne's case, it was about nature. He was spending so much time in nature. It was something that he cared deeply about. He's a passionate environmentalist and conservationist to this day. And I think that's what's driven him. And I think this idea of like purpose describe something. So what does purpose describe being, rather than purpose being a purpose unto itself? And I think that's just such a wonderful question to pose, folks. Is like, well, don't have a purpose. What is your purpose?
Yeah, every organization has a purpose. For many, it's to make money. And his founding purpose was to do something better
Yep.
make something better, make the climbing experience better because he cared, loved
Yep.
about nature and the climbing experience, and that's what it comes down to. It's I talk about often, we're also busy, particularly in marketing, which is my background. We're also busy thinking about how do we make better things, but why not stop and ask the question, are you actually making things better? Because making better things doesn't mean you're making things better.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
yeah, so let's talk about Patagonia's people and its culture, because from what I've learned about the company, it's very different. Yeah, let's talk about Patagonia's people and the culture, because it seems to have a very unique culture. Before, you've been at Patagonia for quite a number of years now, but before that, you were in the retail space as well. Could you feel a difference once you joined Patagonia between, organizations you'd worked at before and Patagonia, or was it quite similar?
I think there were lots of common things, and Patagonia is a private company. I was lucky enough to work for a lot of my formative years at Rip Curl, which is an iconic Australian, what at the time was a private brand that was doing amazing things, lifestyle, cult, and setting surf culture, which was really exciting to be part of. So there was a lot of common ground and a lot of things that I think attracted to me to this business that were similar. But I do think what makes Patagonia so unique is its culture, and the fact that its culture is, set by, shared values, shared interests, but led by employees, not by founders, not by managers. It's not this sort of top-down imposition of culture. It is a result of the eclectic bunch of people that kind of come together and grow together, learn together, and respect each other. Usually you hear about, fantastic companies, the founder story is super central to it. And I think Yvonne's story is absolutely connected and part of Patagonia's journey. But the reality is he's long practiced his own version of an MBA, management by absence. I think he is an agitator. He is an amazing person to bring out the best in others, not through micromanagement, but certainly through giving people opportunity. And I think that's really what sets the tone at this company more than any other that I've worked at. Is you've got a really bold mission, like our new company mission, only 2 years old now after living in the old one for 30 years, is we're in business to save our home planet, which is a really, really big, bold thing to say if you are going to try and live up to that. We've got amazing values. We want to build the best product. We want to cause no unnecessary harm. We use business to protect nature, and we're not bound by convention. And I say those things not to try and reel off what you might see in the tea room, as you might in many companies, but because those things are the moral compass to every business decision that we make. And when we start trying to meet those standards and hold ourselves to those aspirations, it creates this wonderful urgency, and it creates this sort of wonderful camaraderie that we kind of get to pull together with.
Yeah, brilliant. And I observed, like a few years ago, your mission statement were three of those four
Values,
values that you talked about. And for me, it suggests that I guess it's a journey, isn't it? Because now your mission statement is so bold, so ambitious, and it almost feels like, and I find this when I work with my clients as well, you need to build confidence in what you can achieve before you can go for the really big guns and do something that bold. But yeah, it's a journey, and you guys have been treading a path towards that big bold ambition for quite some time now.
Yeah, I think there's lots of little things along the way too, and when we look back, it seems like a lot because it's 50 years of lots of little things. And maybe it's with that kind of, that muscle and experience that the company has the means in which to shoot for more. But we're still a small business, I think, globally speaking. We know that we have to position our impact in places where we can make the most difference, where we can be the tipping point on important things. And one of our biggest strengths is trust, is to convene parties together to work through issues. And I think, things like, being totally committed to transparency in how we do our business and being accountable for our mistakes as well as our successes that have given us this unique position, primarily, I think, first in North America, but that influence is just growing around the world wherever we do business.
And I observed during that time or I think I might have read stories about it, when Patagonia made the transition from cotton to organic cotton, there were a lot of critics who said, yeah, this company holds itself up to be, in service to the environment, and yet they have been creating damage through cotton. And yet what I observed is those critics were few and far between. There were more people who, because of your transparency, seemed to say, yeah, okay, well, they're trying to do the right thing. Let's support them and help them do that.
Absolutely. I think there's, those stories they shared aren't my stories. They're sort of company myths and, things that we kind of draw upon. But I remember when I started in the company, 9 or 10 years ago, one of the first visits that I made to the campus in North America was for a big sales meeting where they release a new range, and everyone comes together and we have a great party and we talk about the year ahead. And one of the, again, coming from selling clothes and, people enjoying kind of lifestyles or outdoor pursuits or whatever that might be, that's just really one dimension of what we do. And I remember when the big story for that season was this, new concept called traceable down. So down are feathers that we put in puffy jackets. So they're somewhat ubiquitous now, puffy jackets in Australia, but they weren't always so. And they released this. All of our products were now going to be made with traceable down, which was our own certification that geese whose feathers we use for our garments weren't coming from geese who were live plucked, nor were they force fed for foie gras kind of food production. And it was a bit shocking just to even hear that, sitting back and watching this video in a big hall full of people, that, I hadn't even considered the idea that, people would be live plucking geese. And why would they do that? The reason is because if you live pluck them, they can grow feathers again and you can pluck them again. So there's this horrible kind of animal cruelty to the whole piece. And our company would even be kind of talking about this. These are the products we make, and we're kind of revealing, what are some of the biggest risks and worst kind of outcomes that could be connected to them. So it was a bit of a startling moment. But the story that sort of sits behind that is about 3 years earlier, the company was approached by a UK-based, animal rights group called Pause. And they said, hey, we think that in your supply chain that you are using products that are coming from farms that are live plucking and other things. And so at the time, the company, instead of trying to sweep it under the rug and kind of, distract and create some kind of PR spin doctor kind of magic, wrote an article about it and published it and told all our customers about, what a concern that's been raised. And then they laid out the steps on how they were going to find out what was going on and what we're going to do about it. And so from that moment, the company went on this journey to understand, where the risks were. We found that there were 9 layers of supply chain before we got to the farm. So there was a lot of disconnection and risk, and, things could definitely go wrong. They did find, however, that there was no evidence that we were sourcing feathers from those farms, but the risk of it happening was enough that we felt like we needed to do something more substantial. That led to the setup of this traceable down certification that is third party, independent of Patagonia, that comes in and audits and certifies the farms. For me, that was a real personal moment of watching a couple of things. Number one, how you deal with a crisis can be one of your biggest strengths. So dealing with it as a person would, owning up to it, talking about what you're going to do about it. Generally, you'll find people are pretty understanding if you follow through on saying that. I think companies often find themselves in this space where they're trying to create this unattainable perfection that must last forever. The other thing I learned is that, whilst it was totally counterintuitive to everything you learn at business school, it's also free and available to every single business out there. Doing the right thing is absolutely free. And if you do it enough, then perhaps over time you'll build a reputation like Patagonia has that can be part of your brand equity, your business value, the things why people come and buy your goods ultimately.
Doing the right thing is free. I love that. And that's an extraordinary story. about traceable down, and I think that's a massive learning for any business leader, because you're right. The default is, if there's something like that comes up on the radar, the default is quick, hunker down, cover it up, and how do we manage this? Risk management. But what you're saying is there are real benefits in approaching this humanly, you know?
That's the thing. Like, there's no real secret of Patagonia, because what you see is what you get, and I think that ultimately is why people like it. They sort of see something in that they wish they would see more of out there in the business world, when really, businesses are set up marketing first, product later. How are we going to create demand so we can fill it and kind of create more money? And I think, when we worked for a company that ran an ad that said, "Don't buy our products," that was a real seminal moment, and something that's quoted in business schools around the world now. I feel like there's just a sort of a beautiful simplicity and elegance into that again is available to all, but it is counterintuitive to what's really motivating you. And perhaps, we're lucky after 50 years of being in business that we have the means under which to kind of, push the boundaries on that a little further.
It's actually ridiculously simple, isn't it? If you think about it. And I guess, again, it comes back to the people you attract. So, what kind of people work at Patagonia? How does Patagonia's culture and values and purpose, how does it impact who it attracts and how long they stay, and how they work while they're there? Can you share a bit of that?
Yeah. Well, it attracts all sorts of people. I think there's certainly folks who are super attracted by our environmental mission, and that, have a real personal, phase of their life where they feel connected to that. And we get a lot of, outreach and applications of people who just want to work here, no matter the job, no matter their background, overqualified, underqualified. And that's just, testament to, again, that sort of, love that people feel for the brand's kind of, mission and purpose. But we have diverse employees. We have all sorts of backgrounds. I think you have to share our values to somewhat be happy here. I think Rick, that fellow I mentioned earlier, once described it to me, which I thought was very elegant. It can be the best or the worst place you've ever worked, depending on what you care about. If you are hungry, ambitious, and really motivated by winning, or that short-term financial success, then this can be an incredibly slow and stifling and unrewarding place to work. However, if you are aligned with the company's values, you can really feel like you're contributing to something that you care deeply about, and what a wonderful way to kind of earn your living. So I think we are diverse. It's not just like, do you care about the environment? Do you like outdoor sports? I always think about. I remember, again, like on that first trip to North America, and meeting a bunch of employees up there. Meeting a fellow who worked in the finance department, and his passion in life was restoring vintage fire engines. An interesting hobby, like the last thing that you would have to see in an outdoor adventure style kind of company. But again, you realise that it is through the passion for that people bring to their life, and that they can apply through their jobs, both technical expertise, or mission-centric kind of moral kind of questions we encounter day to day, that really kind of binds us all together. And there's a real healthy respect, I think, for having that diversity in the room to help get better outcomes.
Is it true you let your people go surfing during work hours?
Yeah, well, I think it's a fantastic name for the company's book, Let My People Go Surfing, and the answer is yes. I think Yvonne describes in the book is like you can't plan your day. You can't tell your calendar when the surf's going to be good. You kind of got to go when it's going to be good. However, again, we have responsibilities to our colleagues, to getting the job done. And I think, we just give the responsibility and onus to the individual to say, hey, if you can do it, go for it. But if someone's relying on you like that, that's important too.
It goes right back to what you said in the beginning, Dane. It's about caring about people and letting people do what they do, trusting them. And that comes down to making sure you've got the right people in the organisation in the first place. You've talked about Rick Ridgway a fair bit, and I went to a Patagonia movie event several years ago. It was the screening of Takeina, and Rick Ridgway was there. They had a panel afterwards, and they had Rick Ridgway and Bob Brown and a couple of other people. But there was something he said that really got to me, and he talked about how you need to fall in love with nature, and you need to let it get into your soul, and you need to walk in nature to be able to do that. And he said only when you let it get into your soul is, that is when you will care enough about it to protect it, which is what we need to happen, obviously. And it was, it was just so, it was incredible to hear a business leader talk like that with such passion and such conviction. And I think that's the thing that attracts so many people to the brand. I just wanted to share a little story. When I pivoted my business away from my marketing agency to do what I do today, I was starting from scratch, right? I didn't even really know exactly what I was creating. And I went through a couple of really lean years. And, my family and I, we had to live so small, huge Northern Beaches mortgage. And it's incredible how small you can live when you have to. And, credit to my family for letting me pursue my passion to do that. And through all this time, I wrote my first book. I wrote about Patagonia in that book. I talked a lot of events I spoke at. I talk about Patagonia. And yet I could never afford to pay for Patagonia because it's not cheap, right? But the people who buy Patagonia are prepared to pay more because of how you do business. So when eventually I got to the stage where we had some money, Christmas presents, that first Christmas, I bought everything in our local Manly Patagonia store because that's what I cared about, and that's what the people around me cared about. And I guess that I share that story really, again, as a demonstration of how loving a brand and what it stands for, and wanting to support that brand's mission. And that's how people show up for you, your customers, your employees, and your partners as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, thank you for your custom.
Oh, my pleasure.
And look, I would say,
sorry it took so long.
And I would say, and you're probably experiencing this now, is, our products are priced at the price that we think is reasonable for what you're getting, and when you're comparing a jacket that is made as cheaply as possible and then charged at a rate which is what the market can bear, that is all about maximizing profit for the company that's making it. When we make our products, there's a lot of value that you don't see, not just in, the traceable down or the recycled materials or the low footprint, but also making sure that the people making those goods are paid a fair and, living wage to make that sort of stuff. The other thing that I think Patagonia does really well is its focus on quality. Quality, I think this is where the economics of, buying clothes are really interesting. So when people go, wow, your jacket's twice the price of a competitor's puffy jacket, we're like, yeah, but how long is it going to last? And you send it back, we'll repair it for you for free. So suddenly this jacket in which you paid, $300 for, not $150 for, last you 10 years, not 2 years, the economics of you having to rebuy something over and over again are really interesting. So I always, I think one of the other kind of really simple and elegant design principles of Patagonia is environmentalism through our products. Of course, we are pursuing, the least amount of harm and impact and footprint we can with the materials that we use. One of the most simple things we can do is make it last a long time. Keep it at landfill. Don't buy another one. Don't make another one. And when I heard that kind of like perspective for the first time, I was like, how simple and how kind of commonsensical. If that's all we've got to do and start to kind of like reduce how much we're kind of like throwing into landfill, because it's, no fashionable or no longer, functioning, then, that's something we can all do.
Yeah, it turns everything on its head, but like you say, it's so simple. And you mentioned elegance before, and that comes through in spades. Can you share some of the examples of organisations you've partnered with in service of saving our home planet?
I think partnerships really for our company began first and foremost supporting not-for-profit environmental groups. And that really started with us, very early on deciding to give away 1% of our company's revenues as a type of earth tax, a practice that we still do today. And so that's given us a huge amount of knowledge and friends in that space that we care about so much, under which to help us kind of understand our impact and understand what good we can do by supporting others. So I'd say, first and foremost, our not-for-profit, community is probably, primarily, one of the core partnerships I'd like to talk about. I think there are other organisations that kind of bind companies together, in this sort of, sense of partnership. So we're not a company that does collabs or does this sort of idea of like, how can we stick my brand on your brand and we all make a bit more money for 6 months, then we go back to doing what we're doing beforehand. We're an early adopter of the B Corp certification and movement in North America, and we're proud certified B Corp. We're a founding member of 1% for the Planet. Again, that 1% earth tax that we impose upon ourselves. But one of the stories I love to recount, again, Rick was, fortunately inside this story. He told me the story, and it's just stuck with me over the years. And really, it was about the formation of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition, which today represents, I think, over 40% of the world's textile and footwear kind of businesses. So it's a huge group of companies that are collaborating around kind of reducing impact. And I describe it like a huge Wikipedia for sustainability for a company. When you join, you agree to tip your information in anonymously, but you get the wisdom of that kind of collective, that kind of rolled up and tools, sort of stuff. But it started was, of all companies to reach out to want to do some work with Patagonia, Walmart reached out to us. So, big, evil kind of Walmart company. And they said, we'd love to work with you on sustainability. And, I think when the company kind of like got that request, it was a bit like, well, this is a unusual request and maybe a big opportunity. What the people at Walmart and Rick and the folks at Patagonia decided to do was to send out a letter to, I think it was something like the top 20 American companies at the time, to come together and kind of talk about, what we could do actually to reduce our impact. And they sent out an invitation on a letterhead that had Patagonia's logo and Walmart's logo at the top of the letterhead, to make these invitations. And Rick recounts, that he's sure the reason why most of them came was just such an unusual kind of pairing of brands to be making that request. But that first meeting and that first kind of get together of those companies and representatives is what led to, this amazing organisation that's serving so many today. So I think Patagonia has always been in the business of collaborating and partnerships when it's in service of its mission, in service of doing good, rather than in service of, increasing our sales or profit for any kind of given period.
Yeah, brilliant. And it's about creating movements of change, isn't it? Finding collaborators, bringing them along the way, seeing where you can actually forward that movement. Yeah, very, very cool. Can you share with our listeners some examples of Patagonia's activism?
Sure. Well, in my time here, our environmental impact in Australia has grown, substantially, which is just something I'm so proud to be, part of. We've supported many Australian, environmental issues, and we've actually found that through working with our partners, through really kind of, getting behind some unpopular, I guess, and, ignored issues, we've been able to kind of really make a difference, which is fantastic. You mentioned the Takana film a little earlier, that we made that film in service and support of the fight the Bob Brown Foundation has been leading for many years in protecting the northwestern part of Tasmania and looking to secure World Heritage protection for, old growth temperate rainforest down there. That film we made had a wonderful reception both here in Australia but also around the world, and led to a petition calling for the protection of that space, which had over 225,000 signatories, and we were able, huge, and we were able to get that petition tabled at the Tasmanian State Parliament, and at the time it was the biggest petition ever tabled for an environmental reason in that state's history. Sadly, the government has yet to protect that area, but our support for the Bob Brown Foundation and protection of that area continues. We had another wonderful campaign a couple of years back that's kind of going still today in protection for the Great Australian Bight. There was a number of, oil drilling exploration permits, right out in the middle of nowhere where no one can see, but with huge potential for things to go wrong. And we joined forces with, a great suite of not-for-profits and locals down in this remote part of Australia to try and, stop the start, digging these deep sea wells off in the Southern Ocean, which should something go wrong, capping them off and stopping the oil spurting out or the gas spurting out could be really, really, I guess, devastating. We picked a fight with, I guess, an oil company. If you're going to pick a fight with any of them, we picked a Norwegian state-owned kind of, somewhat progressive kind of energy company called Equinor. And we put a lot of effort into really, challenging them and asking them to, pull out from their exploration, in the area. And after many months of trying and, different actions and, catalysing and supporting, locals around the country to really kind of, stand up and fight for this, somewhat, ubiquitous and important part of our wilderness. We thought we'd lost, and then some months later, Equinor decided to quietly kind of, rescind their drilling permit and go off and do something else. So there's been some really great wins, but what we find with every win, that just kind of reveals the next step of the next, thing that needs to be kind of done. So we're calling for, significant, protections to be put in place in the Great Australian Bight, protect that important marine wilderness forever, not just from, this round of oil companies who are looking to drill. So, there's no shortage of places where the companies, efforts and funds and energy can go support in this neck of the woods.
And what strikes me from what you say, Dane, is a lot of what you do is action. Activism is action, right? But then rolled up in all of that is partnership and marketing, because, you find partners, you find collaborators, your customers, Patagonia fans become collaborators when they sign petitions and, show up doing what you invite them to do. And that becomes your marketing as well. It's not a, look at us, aren't we great? It's an invitation to join us and help create change. And for me, that's why, and I'm sure you get sick of that tag of the poster child for purpose, but that is why you are, is because you're head down, bum up, doing it.
We're an unconventional business, and it's really hard sometimes to fit what we do in traditional business structures and terms. But again, like I always really try and use plain language, because it isn't complicated. It's just, we're fortunate to work for people who own this company who want us to do more than just sell the clothes. They want us to figure out how we can use the business as a tool for environmental protection. And when you have that sort of mandate and a lot of latitude into how you might explore to do that, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And today we've had the news about the IPCC coming out and saying that, 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming means we're going to lose whole countries, particularly in the Pacific Island. So, we're going to need a lot more than government to do something. We can't rely on government to do things. It seems that business has the means and the scale to actually step up and do something on that. So with that in mind, what do you have any words of advice to other business leaders who are either starting a new company today, or who are leading companies? What advice do you have for them in terms of their purpose journey, if it's something on their radar, and how they can use their business as a vehicle to create something positive?
Well, I can only speak from my own experience, and I'm sure that I feel like there's a lot more learning and kind of experiences I need to gain to really give legitimate advice to others on that front. But I think it all starts with what is right and what you kind of care about, and you don't have to look far to see things in your life that you care about, that are people, that are places, that are more than just stuff that you buy. And, you don't have to look far to see people who have prioritized stuff in their life to sort of see, a sense of unhappiness that creeps in over time. So, we sort of put, nature and people and planet in the sort of same bucket and kind of go, hey, we're all interdependent. How do I start, with the small choices I can make in my own life, or with the influence that I have in the positions that we find ourselves, act. And I think one of the biggest challenges I have here is not so much, what am I allowed to do? But, I find myself working for a company that, expects so much, and I have a short time here, I'm sure, so what am I going to do with that opportunity that sort of sits in front of me? So I'd ask others to look around them and say, what opportunities do I have? Certainly, it's not easy. It's not easy to bring change to organizations. It's not easy to, be radical. But I think it all starts with, small stuff, and, it starts on kind of building trust and building helping people, bring people along with you, in what you want to do.
And I'm pretty sure, especially today with the younger generation, that you do something from the heart, you do something with love, you stand for something that you truly care about, and people will follow.
They will. And I think, I'd sort of share this thought around marketing, because I think, marketing is what people see about your company. That's all it is. It's what you choose to tell about yourself and hope that people listen. And our company's marketing has always been founded on telling stories about things we care about, whether it be nature or our impact or our efforts to kind of, reduce it or protect nature. I'm really convinced that modern advertising, digital data targeting, artificial intelligence, consumer psychology, they've created this environment where, companies are in the business of unlimited growth, and they've got to find ever new ways to get people to buy their stuff. So it's this horrible kind of, cycle in which we find ourselves, but it's a relatively new one. You don't have to go back far in time to see products that were designed to be repaired. That repairing your washing machine was the norm, not throwing it out and going to Harvey Norman and buying a new one. So I think what I've learned at Patagonia is that there is another way. And when a business exists for more than just making profit and legitimately lives up to that mission, like doesn't just write it down and then just keep going on with what it was doing, then people who care about the same things ultimately reward it with their customer over the competition. And we see that market, to use those traditional business terms, growing. There are more and more people who care about the impact we're having on the planet, the legacy and the world that we're leaving for our children. And one of the most kind of, I guess, optimistic things, to counterpoint, this awful kind of climate report that's out today, is that those values are strongest the younger the demographic. So when we talk to school kids, when we talk to teenagers and university students, the urgency to act and the kind of like the simplicity of the problem is just, it's just so much more prominent in that age group. So, I think when you have that kind of like, relationship with your customers, and they see it's real and they're rewarding you when you build a relationship over a lifetime, they're going to tell their friends about it. And that is how, I think, those starting a business, or those who want to, build a brand can really kind of go, well, am I building something here that's going to last, 5 years and I can sell out, or I can move on to my next job and I'll, tick that box on those metrics? Or am I kind of coming in service of something that's going to be here long after I go, and have I left a little bit better than I found it?
Brilliant. And you walk away with some pride with that. Dane, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really enjoyed learning more about Patagonia, and I certainly look forward to continuing to support the company. Thanks.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the For Love and Money podcast. If you'd like to take a deeper dive into the purpose movement, visit us at thecauseeffect.com.au. And remember, doing good is good for business. So if you're not doing good, then what are you doing?